Before we begin, viewer discretion is advised. This breakdown is for entertainment purposes, but what you're about to revisit is one of the most unpredictable and volatile moments daytime television has ever broadcast. Because when one of TV's most beloved titans walks into what he assumes is a friendly appearance, only to find himself blindsided by hostility, you get a strain of live-in-ear chaos no scripted drama could ever replicate. Not even a seasoned showman like Steve Harvey could have anticipated the ambush waiting for him on The View. He had entered the studio that morning, expecting routine banter, charming back and forth, a few laughs, a promotional push for his new book. For years, The View had been a comfortable stop on the media circuit, a place where he could rely on warmth, familiarity, and a touch of friendly teasing. But what unfolded instead sparked national conversations, trending hashtags, and weeks of debate. By the end of it, the glossy image of daytime television would look far more fractured than polished. It began like any other Tuesday. Steve Harvey stepped onto the set wearing the immaculate navy suit his audience had come to expect tailored. Confident, unmistakably Steve. His smile, bright as stage lights and twice as warm, radiated the smooth charisma that had carried him through decades of comedy, talk shows, game shows, and best-selling books. As he approached the guest chair, he gave his jacket a practiced tug, the subtle gesture of a man entirely at home in front of a camera. The crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping it. It was a roar. Fans who had followed him for years lit up with excitement. Their energy bounced off the cameras, their faces glowing with the delight of seeing a man who had become part of their daily lives. Even the hosts greeted him with genuine warmth. Whoopi Goldberg smiled, her grounded maternal smile. Sarah Ann radiated her usual upbeat brightness. Sunny Hostin leaned in with poised enthusiasm. Everything about their welcome promised a smooth, friendly conversation, but at the far end of the table sat Joy Behar. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. She didn't even angle her body toward him. Her arms were crossed like steel bars. Her posture was closed, rigid, and unmistakably defensive, a fortress waiting for the exact moment to fire. A quick flash of instinct buzzed inside Steve Harvey. Years under bright studio lights had trained him to sense tension before it erupted. He caught the signal, but he shrugged it off. Live television had its quirks. Joy had her moods. He wasn't worried. Whoopi kicked off the interview with her trademark blend of warmth and authority. Sarah followed with a question about Steve's best-selling relationship book. Steve slipped comfortably into storyteller mode. He spoke about communication, the patterns he'd seen hosting Family Feud, the hard-earned truths couples often forget until it's too late. The audience hung on every word. Heads nodded. People laughed softly in recognition. It was classic Steve Harvey, grounded wisdom, humor, and smooth delivery. But while the audience leaned in, Joy didn't move. Not an inch. The camera caught her expression more than once. Eyes narrowed, jaw tight, gaze drilling into Steve like a challenge. The tension was subtle at first, a faint tremor running beneath the polished table. But it grew with each passing moment. Trying to keep things light, Steve threw a playful line her way. "Joy, you look like you've got something to say." That was the opening she'd been waiting for. Her eyes tightened. Her shoulders lifted slightly like a predator adjusting for the strike. Then she spoke slowly, sharply, cutting through the air like a blade. "Well, Steve," she began, "I've been reading your book. And I have to ask, don't you think it's a little hypocritical for someone who's been married 3 times to be giving people relationship advice?" The studio froze. The temperature dropped. For the first time that morning, Steve Harvey had no script, no joke, no charming pivot to soften what had just been unleashed. The real interview had begun. The background chatter died instantly. Laughter drained from the room as though someone had pulled a plug. In its place settled a thick, icy stillness that blanketed the entire studio. Sunny's eyebrows shot up, her expression a mix of disbelief and warning. Sarah's bright smile collapsed into open-mouthed shock. Even Whoopi, who had weathered more live TV chaos than most hosts ever will, widened her eyes, a silent acknowledgement that they had just crossed into dangerously hostile territory. For the briefest moment, Steve Harvey's famous $1,000,000 smile slipped. It wasn't dramatic, just a tiny fracture across his expression. Long enough for millions of viewers to catch the sting before he pulled himself back together. He straightened slightly. Grounding himself, "Joy," he began, voice calm but firm. "I think my experiences, good and bad, actually give me more insight into what works and what doesn't." His hands pressed together on the table, the gesture of a man bracing for impact. But Joy Behar wasn't interested in insight. She was interested in confrontation. "But Steve," she said, leaning forward until her voice cut through the air like a blade, "you've publicly talked about your first 2 marriages ending in divorce. So how can you sit here and tell other people how to keep theirs together when you couldn't keep yours?" Whoopi moved quickly, attempting to intervene. "Joy, I think what Steve is saying is—" "No, Whoopi," Joy snapped, raising a hand sharply to silence her. A stunned gasp rippled through the audience. Off-camera producers froze, eyes wide, headsets buzzing with frantic whispers. "I think our viewers deserve to know." Joy pressed on, her tone edged with accusation. "Why they should take relationship advice from someone with a track record like yours." Steve inhaled deeply, a long breath through his nose. His jaw tightened. Not with anger, but with the restraint of a man wrestling down a storm. Even under direct personal assault, he kept his composure. "Well," he said slowly, his voice steady but edged with steel, "I'm not sure what you're trying to get at here." His gaze locked onto Joy's, unblinking. "But I've been married to my wife Marjorie for over 15 years. Happily, we've built a beautiful blended family. And yes, I learned from my past. That's called growth." "Growth," Joy repeated, letting the word drip with mockery. A sharp laugh escaped her, slicing through the air. "Or is it just good marketing?" The audience gasped again. Murmurs spread like a wave. Sarah raised a trembling hand to her mouth. Sunny looked ready to leap across the table. Even Whoopi shifted uncomfortably, her expression screaming, "This is out of control." But Joy wasn't finished, and another thing. "Steve," she continued, voice dropping to a cold, surgical chill. "Some of those comedy specials you did back in the 90s? The material about women?" She tilted her head. "It hasn't aged well. So how can anyone be sure your advice isn't just outdated thinking repackaged?" Steve set his coffee mug down, a small gesture. But the muffled thud was amplified by the microphones. The sound echoed with finality. His patience was stretching thin. "Joy," he said, turning fully toward her, body language shifting into firm defiance. "I came here to talk about helping people build stronger relationships. Not to be put on trial for jokes I made decades ago. Comedy evolves. People evolve. And my record, I think, speaks for itself." A scattering of uncertain applause broke out. Others sat frozen, stunned by the raw intensity unfolding before them. This was no longer a debate. This was Joy Behar launching a full-scale interrogation, and Steve Harvey refusing to bow. "Does it, though?" Joy fired back instantly. Her voice was a razor's edge. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot like you're profiting from giving advice on something you've struggled with your entire life." A low murmur swept the audience. Steve blinked, the blow landing hard. He opened his mouth to respond. But Joy pushed on relentlessly. "And frankly," she added, twisting the knife, "some of your past comments about women suggest you might not be the best person to tell them how to find love." Another silent shockwave rolled through the studio. Whoopi jumped in, desperate. "Maybe we should talk about the positive feedback the book has received." "Whoopi," Steve said, and his voice had changed. The calm was still there, but thinner now, stretched over something unyielding. A warning. A line in the sand. He turned fully toward Joy again. "Joy wants to have this conversation," he said quietly, his voice steady as a drumbeat. "So let's have it."
So let's have it, Joy. The air in the studio shifted instantly, thickening, tightening, crackling with a new volatile energy. Even the lights seemed to hum louder. Steve Harvey's gaze locked on Joy like a man no longer willing to retreat. "You're sitting here," he continued, voice steady but edged with fire, "trying to tear me down in front of millions of viewers. So, for what? What's your agenda? Joy leaned back with a slow, triumphant smirk, the look of someone certain she'd already won the game. My agenda is truth, Steve, she said smugly. I think our viewers deserve to know who they're taking advice from. She tilted her head, dripping condescension. And honestly, your defensive reaction is very telling. That was the spark. The fuse ignited. Defensive? Steve repeated, his posture snapping upright like a soldier coming to attention. His voice rose, not in volume, but in weight, in power. You're attacking my character, my marriage, my career, and you expect me to sit here and just smile and nod? He pivoted, gesturing toward the audience. That's not happening, ladies and gentlemen. But Joy, relentless as ever, wasn't finished. She gestured toward him with exaggerated flourish. Steve Harvey, everybody, she announced with dripping sarcasm, like a ringmaster introducing a collapsing circus act. This is what happens when you ask legitimate questions. He falls apart. The line snapped something. Steve's chair screeched against the studio floor as he stood. The jarring sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. Sarah gasped. Sonny reached out instinctively as though to pull him back. Whoopi's eyes darted to the frozen production crew. Steve leaned forward, planting his hands firmly on the table, not with aggression, but with ironclad authority. I'm not falling apart, Joy, he said, low, steady, resonant with controlled power. I'm calling out your unprofessional behavior. He let the words hang in the electric silence. This isn't journalism. This is you trying to create a moment. For the first time all morning, Joy's smirk flickered, just a crack, but everyone saw it. The tension skyrocketed. Across the country, viewers leaned in. In the studio, the audience sat frozen, breathless, caught between watching an iconic television moment or a full-scale implosion. Steve Harvey, the king of controlled humor, now stood with a fire no one saw coming. And what happened next would decide whether this segment became a mere footnote or one of the most infamous blow-ups in daytime TV history. This is character assassination, Steve said suddenly, his voice booming across the set like thunder. The studio went still. The hum of the overhead lights grew unnervingly loud. Audience members covered their mouths, wide-eyed. This wasn't the lighthearted show they signed up for. This was personal, raw, unfiltered. At the table, the co-hosts were paralyzed. Sonny shot a nervous look toward Whoopi. Sarah clutched her note card so tightly her knuckles turned white. No one dared intervene. "Sit down, Steve," Joy commanded sharply. The words sliced through the tension like a blade. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" Steve echoed, letting out a short, bitter laugh filled more with hurt than humor. "Joy, you spent the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television, and I'm the one who's embarrassed?" He gestured to the audience again before turning back to Joy. "You know what's embarrassing? A grown woman who thinks bullying is good television." Joy's face flushed a deep, furious red. "Bullying?" she snapped. "I'm asking legitimate questions, questions any responsible journalist would ask. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be on talk shows." "Legitimate questions?" Steve repeated incredulously. "Joy, you started this interview with an attack. You didn't ask about my book. You didn't ask about my family. You didn't ask about my work, my philanthropy, nothing." He pointed at the untouched note cards in front of her. "You came here today with one goal, to tear me down. You went straight for the throat the moment I sat on this stage." Steve's voice carried a tremor, not of fear, but of disbelief. His brows drew together, the lines in his face tightening, as if he were struggling to reconcile the hostility he'd walked into. "That's not journalism," he said, shaking his head slowly. "That's a hit job." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, throwing her head back with an exaggerated roll of her eyes. The gesture was so theatrically dismissive, it drew a few nervous titters from somewhere in the back of the audience. "You're being dramatic. This is how interviews work in the real world, Steve. We don't just toss you softball questions so you can plug your book and walk away feeling adored." And that was the moment Steve's composure, so famously steady, so central to his public persona, began to fracture. He lifted a finger and pointed directly at her, the movement sharp enough to make several audience members flinch. "Joy, I've done thousands of interviews in my career, thousands. I've sat across from the toughest journalists on every major network in this country. I know the difference between a real question and a calculated ambush." And the finger he had raised curled back into a fist that struck the table. Not hard, but with purpose. "And what you're doing here," he said, voice thickening, "falls decisively into the second category." For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was so dense it felt almost alive. Finally, Whoopi, ever the voice of reason, slowly lifted her hands in a gesture of calming surrender. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should cut to a commercial." "No!" Steve's refusal cracked through the silence like a snapped cable. "Joy ignited this, and we're going to extinguish it right here, right now." Gasps scattered through the room like falling dominoes. No guest had ever taken command of a live broadcast with such blunt force. Not on this show, not in recent memory. The hosts looked stunned. The crew froze behind their cameras. And Joy only leaned back in her chair, arms folding over her chest in a posture that dared him to continue. "Fine, Steve," she said, voice steady, expression gleaming with challenge. "You want to talk about personal attacks? Then let's talk about you." She jabbed a finger at the air between them, slicing the space like a blade. "Let's dissect the empire you built, on caricatures of women, on cheap laughs at their expense, on flattening them into jokes. And now here you sit, recasting yourself as some enlightened sage of relationships?" She let out a laugh so cutting it almost stung the skin. "The audacity is breathtaking." Steve's fists tightened at his sides. Not threateningly, no. It was the physical manifestation of someone holding back an earthquake. "Joy, I clearly have some deep-seated grievance with me, because this level of hostility, this isn't standard procedure. So tell me, did I offend you at some event years ago? Did I say something I don't remember? Because this feels deeply personal." "Don't flatter yourself," Joy shot back coldly. "This isn't about you. It's about accountability." "Accountability," Steve repeated, as though tasting the word and finding it spoiled. His next breath shuddered out of him, and he took a small step back, gathering himself. "My past," he said, slowly, "is sleeping in a car because I had nowhere else to go. My past is taking any job, no matter how humiliating, just to eat. My past is clawing my way up from absolutely nothing to build a career, create opportunities, support hundreds of families." His voice grew stronger, resonant. "My past is giving millions to charity, mentoring young comics, lifting kids out of impossible circumstances. But you?" He gestured toward her with an open hand. "Want to crucify me for punchlines from 30 years ago?" Joy flicked her wrist as though shooing away a mosquito. "Oh, spare us the melodrama." A collective gasp rippled through the studio. Steve stared at her, wounded but resolute. "This," he said slowly, "is a public dismantling of a man's character." And the studio, once a place of laughter and light, had become a battlefield of truth, ego, and raw, unfiltered humanity. At the host's table, the other women sat utterly still, like figures carved from stone. Their expressions were wide-eyed, stunned, and unreadable as the conflict escalated in front of them. It was as if the entire set had slipped beyond the boundaries of a daytime talk show and into something volatile and unpredictable. No one knew whether to step in or stay out of the blast radius. Sunny shot a panicked glance at Whoopi, silently begging for direction.
Sarah clutched her note card so tightly her knuckles blanched, the edges of the paper bending beneath the pressure. The rules of live television, of professionalism, of basic decorum, every one of them had evaporated. "Sit down, Steve," Joy commanded, her voice cracking through the tension like a whip. It wasn't a request, it was an order. "You are making a spectacle of yourself." "I'm making a spectacle?" Steve fired back, releasing a short, bitter laugh, one that held far more hurt than humor. "Joy, you spent the last 10 minutes trying to publicly humiliate me, and now you're claiming I'm the one causing a scene?" He gestured broadly toward the stunned audience before pointing sharply back at her. "Do you want to know what a spectacle really is? A grown woman who mistakes cruelty for compelling television." "Cruelty?" she spat. "I am asking legitimate questions. Questions any credible journalist would be obligated to ask. If you can't handle them, perhaps you should avoid the talk show circuit entirely." "Legitimate questions?" Steve repeated, incredulous. His voice rose with each word. "Joy, you opened this segment with a full frontal assault. You didn't ask about my new book. You didn't ask about my children, my philanthropic work, nothing. You went straight for the jugular the instant I walked onto this stage." He shook his head, disbelief etched deep into every line of his face. "That's not journalism. That's a premeditated takedown." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, rolling her eyes with broad, theatrical disdain. "This is how interviews work in the big leagues. We don't just lob softballs so you can plug your latest project and go home feeling adored." Steve's composure, so famously impenetrable, finally began to splinter. He lifted a trembling finger and aimed it squarely at her. "Joy, I have done thousands of interviews across every major network, every top-tier program. I know the difference between tough questions and personal attacks." And his finger jabbed toward the table. "And what you're doing today falls firmly into the latter." At last, Whoopi found her voice. She lifted her hands as though trying to calm a storm. "Maybe," she suggested delicately, "we should take a commercial break." "No," Steve cut her off, the single word slicing through the air with startling force. No guest had ever refused a commercial break on live television. Not like this. Joy leaned back in her chair, arms folded, expression almost taunting. "Fine, Steve, let's finish this." She leaned forward again, locking eyes with him. "You want to talk about personal attacks? Let's talk about you." She jabbed a finger toward him. "Let's talk about how you built a career stereotyping women, laughing at them, reducing them. And now you're trying to rebrand yourself as some kind of relationship guru?" She scoffed loudly. "The hypocrisy is stunning." Steve's hands curled into fists at his sides, not in threat, but in raw emotional restraint. Anger, hurt, disbelief, all of it simmered just below the surface. "Joy," he said slowly, his voice almost pleading for reason. "But this level of hostility, this isn't normal." He spread his hands in bewilderment. "Did I offend you at some event? Did I say something I don't remember? Because this feels deeply personal." "Don't flatter yourself," she snapped. "This isn't personal. This is accountability." "Accountability?" Steve echoed, stunned. "You can't just reinvent yourself," Joy continued, unrelenting, "and expect everyone to forget your past." "My past?" Joy's voice cracked, not from weakness, but from sheer shock at how far she was willing to go. He took a breath that seemed to pull the room inward. "Joy, my past includes growing up homeless, sleeping in my car, working any job I could to survive. My past includes clawing my life from nothing to build a media empire that employs hundreds of people." His voice strengthened. "My past includes giving millions to charity, mentoring young comedians, helping kids who had no chance." He gestured to the audience. "But you want to focus on jokes I told 30 years ago?" "Oh, spare us the sob story," Joy said with a dismissive wave. Gasps rippled through the room. "Steve, plenty of people overcome adversity without degrading women." The table fell silent until Sarah finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Joy, I think maybe we're going too far." But the damage had already been done. The line had been crossed, and the confrontation had cemented itself as one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history.